All right, so this is the start of part 3 for our viruses and cancer lecture. So we've got, looking here on this slide, just human retroviruses. So human retroviruses, human foamy-virus, which sounds kind of awesome. But it's actually, it's much less awesome than the name suggests. Human foamy-virus is not associated with any known disease. Now, HTLV, this is, I think, the first retrovirus that was discovered in people. Most people who have it are asymptomatic, so we should stress that. Most people who have this are asymptomatic, but sometimes people get ATL, or adult T-cell leukemia. The other disease that it can be associated with is abbreviated HAM, and it's HTLV1 associated myelopathy. So again, pretty rare, but occasionally is linked with a cancer, so ATL or HAM. Now, HTLV1 can be transmitted through sex. It can be transmitted through, blood-to-blood contact. It can be transmitted vertically, so it can cross the placenta, or breastfeeding. But again, most of the time it's asymptomatic. Now, HTLV2 is known to cause a T-cell malignancy, but it's pretty poorly studied. We don't know much about HTLV2. And of course, HIV, so there were 2 incidences where SIV, simian immunodeficiency virus, crossed over into people. And so we've got HIV-1 and HIV-2, which of course have spread around the world primarily, or I should say more HIV-1, less HIV-2. In many instances, HIV-2 is a little more mild than HIV-1. We will talk extensively about HIV later in the semester, in the coming weeks. HIV is not known to cause cancers on its own, but it can be a factor in other viral-associated cancers like Epstein-Barr virus and Burkitt's lymphoma. Now, DNA tumor viruses. We've got RNA viruses and we've got DNA viruses. DNA tumor viruses and RNA tumor viruses differ in that the viral oncogenes of DNA tumor viruses are essential viral genes and important in replication. So DNA tumor viruses need these genes in order to replicate. RNA tumor genes, on the other hand, we think they are kind of stolen from the host cell. We think that these viral associated genes are not necessarily essential, and that they are taken directly from the cell during a mistake in viral replication. So this would be a really good essay question, is why do we think that viral oncogenes from RNA viruses are stolen cellular analogs, but the viral oncogenes from DNA viruses are essential parts of their viral replication cycle and not necessarily stolen from the cell at all. They could be viral in origin instead of stolen from the cell. So why do you think that the RNA oncogenes are stolen cellular genes? That would be a good essay question, something for you guys to think about. DNA tumor viruses specifically target P53. Make sure that you guys are familiar with the cyclins and the elements of the cell cycle from that previous video. Now, something important, we talk about this, or we will with HPV, is that transformation occurs not during a normal viral cycle, but when you have an aborted replication cycle. So you've got a virus that's not actively producing the normal amount of viral progeny, or maybe not producing any viral progeny at all. You have an aborted or defective viral replication cycle, that the virus has gotten stuck early in its replication cycle. We're going to talk first about Epstein-Barr virus. Epstein-Barr virus is a DNA virus. It's a herpes virus, or it would be human herpes virus 4. This is really famous for causing mononucleosis, so most of the time this is asymptomatic. But occasionally it can cause mononucleosis that many of you guys are familiar with, also known as the kissing disease. Symptoms of mononucleosis would be fever, extreme fatigue. Very important if you have mononucleosis is you have to avoid a lot of physical activity because you have an enlarged spleen. And if you play football with an enlarged spleen and you get tackled, then your spleen can rupture, which would be very, very bad. Excuse me. You also have a sore throat and really bad headaches, loss of appetite. And it can take a long time to recover from mononucleosis. It's not something you get over within 3 or 4 days. This can be many, many weeks to get over mononucleosis. But most people with Epstein-Barr are asymptomatic. In fact, they think 95% of the US population is infected with Epstein-Barr virus. So why is it some people get mononucleosis and others don't? And why is it some people with Epstein-Barr get tumors? Why do some people with Epstein-Barr get Burkitt's lymphoma? Burkitt's lymphoma is a solid tumor of B cells. And this can be very, very serious. And we know that it's much, much more likely that you will get Burkitt's lymphoma if you have a co-infection with either malaria or HIV. But we don't entirely know why. We don't know all the details of why a co-infection with malaria or HIV helps Epstein-Barr virus cause cancer. So there's still a lot of research going into that. What we do know is that when you, B cells, of course, make antibodies, and when B cells undergo differentiation, they need to do a lot of gene rearrangements. And if you have a mistake during the gene rearrangement of producing B cells, which can be triggered by Epstein-Barr, then you can get tumors formed. Then you can get cancers in your B cells, and you can get Burkitt's lymphoma. But we don't know why this is more common, or we don't know all the details when you have HIV or malaria. Now, Kaposi sarcoma-associated herpes virus, or human herpes virus 8, is also pretty common. Many, many people are infected with this. However, most of us don't get cancer. So this is much more common if you have AIDS, if you have untreated HIV, you have a much weaker immune system, or elderly men, particularly elderly men of Middle Eastern descent, Mediterranean descent, ethnically Jewish men. elderly, so 50, 60, 70 years old. So hepatitis B and hepatitis C. Both of these viruses cause cancer. These viruses, remember, are not genetically related to each other, but they both cause chronic hepatitis. So chronic inflammation, chronic infection in the liver. Now, the rate of progression from infection to cancer varies, particularly with hepatitis B. With hepatitis B, if you're infected when you're young, you are much, much, much more likely to get cancer. If you're infected when you're older, you're much less likely to get chronic infection and later develop cancer. Now, with hepatitis C, this can infect anyone through blood contact, and you're more likely overall to get cancer from hepatitis C infection than you are hepatitis B infection. Remember, these two viruses molecularly are different. So hepatitis C is an RNA virus. Hepatitis B is a DNA virus that replicates using a intermediate. Remember, hepatitis B uses reverse transcription. So the DNA gets into the nucleus, it starts replicating, you send the mRNAs out to the cytoplasm, you start making proteins, you start making new viruses, and then as the virus is on its way out, it's like, wait, we need a genome, and it uses reverse transcription to make new DNA genomes from their messenger RNA. So these two viruses molecularly are very different, but they both cause chronic hepatitis. Now, hepatitis B can integrate into your genome. The hepatitis B viral DNA can integrate into your genome and can lead to cancer. We don't entirely know how hepatitis C causes cancer except through the chronic inflammation. Now, it's important to note that your book has made a mistake here. It says that there's a vaccine for hepatitis B, and that's absolutely correct. However, it also says that there's a vaccine available for hepatitis C, and this is not correct. We have been researching, and by we, I mean the royal we, so not me personally, but other scientists have been working really, really hard for a very long time to come up with a hepatitis C vaccine, but it's been unsuccessful so far. One of the latest clinical trials, and there's a link here, they had a clinical trial evaluating hepatitis C, and this trial had been going on for a number of years, and they just recently concluded that it was not effective. So this is kind of disappointing. There are still other candidates for hepatitis C vaccines, but none of them are currently available yet. HPV. So HPV, excuse me, human papillomavirus, is the virus that causes more cancer than anything else. Remember that papilloma is the fancy word for warts, and all warts are caused by one strain of HPV or another. So all warts are caused by one strain of human papillomavirus. Now, there are many, many, many strains of HPV, and only some of them cause cancer. Many of them do not. It's only certain latent HPVs that have an error in their replication cycle that are going to cause cancer. So one of the ways that they've found to screen for HPV is Pap smear. And your book has an interesting little emphasis on the creation of the Pap smear. It was named after this guy. And these screening programs have been really important in reducing mortalities and catching things early. The Gardasil vaccine has been really, really effective in preventing cancer. Now, it's important to note that HPV cannot enter the dead skin cells, right? They're not metabolically active and they're getting sloughed off. HPV has to enter through a little cut, and the cut can be very, very small. It can be just a little microabrasion. And the virus has to get into these basal cells. Now, in the basal cells, the virus can start replicating its genome, but it can't replicate the whole virus. It can't complete its replication cycle. So inside the cell, it needs certain factors to complete its replication cycle that are not present in these basal cells. So as the cells differentiate into keratinocytes, then the virus is able to complete its replication cycle and spread. Now, there's a really, really good video on the replication cycle and the genetics of HPV. And in this video, she talks about how these viruses cause cancer. This is an essential part of the material, so you guys need to watch this video, and the link is in Canvas in Module 3. In short, the genes E6 and E7, they're overexpressed in cancer cells. Now, in viruses that don't cause cancer, they have this insertion here, and this makes this messenger RNA unstable, and these genes are not going to cause cancer. But in the ones that do cause cancer, that AUUUA here is missing. And so this is a more stable gene product, and it can lead to stimulation of the cell cycle and overgrowth and cancer. Now, it's important, again, that you guys get all of the details, so this is a really good lecture for you guys to watch. Now, summing this chapter up, we're skipping over some of the other things in this chapter. The Gardasil vaccine, or the HPV vaccines, these have been really, really effective in preventing cancer and saving lives. And remember that viruses cause 20% of all human cancers, and HPV causes 80% of that 20%. And so these HPV vaccines have saved a lot of lives. And remember, they save not just women from cervical cancer, but people from oral cancers, throat cancers, also penile cancer and anal cancer. And they're trying to make new and improved Gardasil vaccines that protect against all of the strains that cause cancer. It's an ongoing process, but they're creating multivalent vaccines through recombination to have one vaccine that protects against multiple strains. Now, some of you guys have brought it up, 8 years old or however, whenever they do the vaccination is a little young. And sure, I will agree with you that 8 years old is young to get an HPV vaccine. If it was just me personally, I would say any time before you become sexually active. The exact year that they pick the vaccine is a little bit arbitrary, but it's really important that you get this vaccine before you become sexually active, because these viruses are very, very common. And many people have HPV and don't know it. There's an exceptionally long incubation period, up to 20 years, before you might develop symptoms or before you might have an abnormal pap smear. So you can have this virus for a very long time and spread it to many, many people before you ever know that you have it, before you ever have symptoms. So these are some of the most common circulating viruses that can be transmitted sexually. So getting the vaccine before you become sexually active is very, very important. All right, this is going to end the recorded lecture on viruses and cancer. Remember to watch those 2 other videos, and then the next slideshow, next recorded lecture is going to be on gene therapy and oncolytic genes. I'm sorry, oncolytic viruses.